My whole family was gathered to celebrate James's wedding. My father announced into the microphone, interrupting our first dance with a voice full of self-importance. "I have an important announcement to make." My wife Sarah looked at me confused as the 200 guests turned their attention to Walter Thompson, the patriarch of Thompson Technologies, who even at my own wedding could not resist being the center of attention. "After 30 years of building our family business, the time has come for a new phase," he continued, his beaming smile in stark contrast to the knot forming in my stomach. "We've decided to sell Thompson Technologies. The buyer has offered $60 million. Polite applause echoed through the hall as Sarah squeezed my hand and whispered in my ear, "What an amazing wedding gift, but if only she knew what was coming next." My father lifted his champagne glass and added, "And as we've always planned to keep the family legacy alive, the entire proceeds will go to my eldest son, Daniel, so he can start his own company and carry on the Thompson tradition." The silence that followed was deafening. 200 people simultaneously processing that the groom, me, had just been publicly cut out of the family inheritance on his wedding day. My name is James Thompson. I'm 31 years old and I have just discovered that my father chose the most important day of my life to humiliate me in front of everyone I know. But while Daniel received congratulations and pats on the back, I kept my smile fixed because there is something my father doesn't know about me. Something that will turn this public humiliation into the biggest upset in our family's history. I grew up as the invisible middle child of the Thompsons. Daniel, 3 years older, was always the natural heir with a business degree and charisma that made him everything a businessman father could want. While my younger sister Emily was the spoiled princess who could do anything without consequences. And me, I was the family nerd, the one who preferred computers to sports, code to small talk. And when I showed interest in the family business, Dad dismissed me with, "Leave that to those who understand it, son." Thompson Technologies had started as a small software company in the late 1990s. Dad was lucky enough to ride the internet wave and turn it into a $40 million annual revenue operation. Not bad for someone who barely knew how to use email when he started. But the problem was that he never evolved. As the market shifted to cloud solutions, artificial intelligence, and automation, he insisted on sticking with legacy systems and outdated methods. And over the past 5 years, the company had been steadily losing customers. Daniel, as vice president of operations, agreed with everything Dad said. Why question anything when you know you're going to inherit everything anyway? His only contributions were expensive lunches with potential clients and reports copied from the internet. When I turned 22, fresh out of MIT with a degree in computer science, I presented my dad with a detailed plan to modernize the company. He listened for exactly 10 minutes before interrupting, "James, you understand technology, but business is for men with life experience." That night, I made the decision that would change everything. If he didn't want my help to save the company, I would build my own. For 9 years, while everyone thought I was playing with computers in California, I quietly built an empire under the pseudonym J.T. Parker, James Thompson Parker, and created Vertex Digital Solutions. What began as freelance consulting turned into a $120 million company specializing in the very technologies Thompson Technologies ignored. And ironically, several of my father's biggest competitors became my clients. As Sarah and I danced our first song as a couple, I watched my father being congratulated by guests who praised his generosity toward Daniel, oblivious to the cruelty of making such an announcement at my wedding. Sarah noticed my tension and asked, "Are you okay? I know it must hurt not to get anything from the inheritance." I smiled, spun her around the dance floor, and said, "Actually, honey, I think it's going to be really interesting to find out who bought the company because tomorrow morning, when the contracts were signed, my father would discover that J.T. Parker, the mysterious buyer of Thompson Technologies, was much closer than he thought." The party continued as if nothing had happened. The guests returned to their conversations, some whispering discreetly about the announcement, while Sarah kept her bridal smile. But I could feel her confusion growing with each handshake from people offering disguised condolences. "What a delicate situation," Aunt Linda murmured as she kissed my cheek. "But I'm sure your father knows what he's doing." Walter Thompson always knew exactly what he was doing, especially when it came to putting me in my place when I won the State Programming Award at 16. He arrived late to the ceremony because of an important meeting. While Daniel, who had failed calculus that same semester, got a new car to motivate him to try harder. At 21, when I landed an internship at Google, Dad remarked at the dinner table, "I hope this knocks the entrepreneurial fantasies out of your head. Big companies need employees, not dreamers." And on that same day, Daniel, who had been expelled from 2 colleges for cheating, was promoted to junior consultant at Thompson Technologies. The pattern was always the same. My successes were minimized as coincidences or luck, while Daniel's failures were reframed as valuable learning experiences that made him more mature for leadership. But the moment that truly changed everything came 3 years ago at Thanksgiving dinner when I had just secured my second round of investment for Vertex Digital Solutions, $20 million that would turn my startup into a real company. "Dad, I have some news," I began, unable to contain my excitement. "My company has received a significant investment. We're expanding into 3 new states." Walter barely looked up from his turkey before saying, "That's great, son. Daniel, tell your brother about the new contract you landed." Daniel, who I knew had lost 2 major clients that month, proceeded to fabricate details about a supposed $1 million deal. And Dad listened with religious attention, asking detailed questions and showing the kind of interest he had never shown in my projects. "See, James," Dad concluded, "that's how you build a real business, with relationships, not computer tricks." That night, I made the decision that would culminate in this moment. If Walter Thompson wanted to pretend I didn't exist, I would disappear completely until I was ready to reappear with full force. I watched Daniel across the room, receiving congratulations from uncles and cousins. At 34, he had settled perfectly into the role of the unworthy heir with perfectly coy hair, expensive suits Dad paid for, and that arrogant smile of someone born believing he deserved everything. "Thanks, Uncle Stephen," Daniel would say, adjusting his tie. Dad always knew I had a natural instinct for business. It's in my DNA. DNA as if incompetence were hereditary. For years, I had watched Daniel turn every opportunity into a disaster. Each one more baffling than the last. Yet somehow always landing on his feet. When Dad put him in charge of the company's biggest client, Daniel outsourced the work to a cut-rate Indian company, which predictably delivered such a flawed product that we nearly lost the contract altogether. Though of course the blame was spun away, placed conveniently on supposed communication failures and unrealistic customer expectations. When he later became responsible for hiring new developers, he chose candidates based almost entirely on personal chemistry, a transparent code for people who would flatter him and feed his ego, resulting in a technical team so inept they could barely manage to update a basic website. The solution naturally was not to hold him accountable, but to restructure technical responsibilities and reframe the whole debacle as a strategic shift. Every one of Daniel's failures was repackaged as valuable experience. While every success I achieved outside the company was either ignored, dismissed, or diminished until it barely registered in family conversations. I was still digesting all of this when Sarah approached, holding 2 champagne glasses, her brow creased in concern. "Are you okay? You seem distant." "Just processing the news," I replied, accepting the glass. "It must be a shock to find out you married the poor son of the family." She laughed, thinking I was joking. "James, you exaggerate. His father must have his reasons. Maybe it's about fiscal responsibility or something." If she only knew that my little consulting firm had closed $15 million in contracts in the last quarter alone. "Besides," Sarah continued, $60 million is a lot of money. Even split between the 2 of you." "Not split," I corrected gently. "All for Daniel." Her confusion deepened, but before I could answer her questions, Daniel appeared wearing his new millionaire smile. "Bro, what an amazing day, huh? My wedding and my future secured." "Your wedding?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Oh, you know what I meant?" Daniel laughed, patting my shoulder in that condescending way he had perfected. "Your big day, my big news. Worked out perfectly." Sarah frowned. "Daniel, don't you think the timing was a little inappropriate?" "Sarah, honey," Daniel began in his seasoned executive tone. "Business doesn't wait for convenient moments. Dad got the offer this morning. $60 million cash, 48-hour deadline. Take it or leave it." Lies. I knew better because I had personally structured every detail of J.T. Parker Investments' offer and the deadline had been completely flexible. Walter had chosen this specific moment out of pure calculated cruelty. And honestly, Daniel continued, it's better that James knows how things are right up front. He's always had these fantasies about joining the family business, but he needs to accept reality. What reality? Sarah asked, her voice gaining a firm edge. That some people are built for leadership and others, Daniel shrugged, looking at me with false sympathy. Others are better suited for different paths. The insult was so casual, so baked into the way he thought that I saw Sarah finally begin to understand what I had endured for decades. At that moment, Dad approached, still basking in his performance of power. Daniel, we need to talk about the transition. The new owner wants a meeting tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Sure, Dad. I'm already thinking of several improvements we can implement. Walter nodded approvingly. Excellent. That's exactly the kind of strategic vision that convinced me to structure the sale this way. He glanced at me briefly, almost as an afterthought. James, I hope you understand this isn't personal. It's about preparing Daniel to lead his own company. Of course, Dad, I replied calmly. I'm sure Daniel is more than ready to meet the new owner tomorrow. Daniel smiled with excessive confidence. It'll be interesting to work with this J.T. Parker guy. I looked him up. Very mysterious. Never gives interviews. Must be one of those eccentric tech investors. I'm sure you'll get along great, I said, hiding my smile behind my champagne glass. Dad checked his Rolex. Well, Daniel, let's mingle more. There are investors here you should meet now that you're the CEO of your own company. As they walked away, Sarah turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before. James, how long has this been going on? What specifically? The way they treat you like you're irrelevant. The question hurt more than I expected. Not because it was offensive, but because someone had finally noticed. Always, I said simply. She stayed silent for a long moment, watching Walter and Daniel work the room like some kind of presidential duo. Well, she said finally, they don't know who they're messing with, do they? I smiled for the first time that night. No, honey, they really don't. Because tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning, when Daniel walked confidently into the boardroom, expecting to meet the mysterious J.T. Parker, he discovered the new owner of the family business had a very familiar face, and that a few computer tricks can be worth far more than $60 million. The party went on, but the dynamic had shifted completely. Daniel was now the center of attention, telling anyone who would listen about his visionary plans for the new company. I'm going to modernize everything, he declared to a group of impressed uncles. Dad built a solid foundation, but it needs someone with vision to take it to the next level. Forward thinking from someone who still used Internet Explorer because it works perfectly fine. Sarah's grip on my arm tightened with every self-congratulatory line Daniel delivered. She was beginning to understand the pattern I had known for decades. James has always been more technical, Daniel continued, gesturing with his champagne glass. But leading a company requires interpersonal skills, business acumen. It's not for everyone. My cousin Michael, who worked at Goldman Sachs, asked the question I had been waiting for. What about James? Isn't he going to be part of the transition? Daniel laughed in that condescending way of his. James has his own things going on in California. Small consulting firms, you know how it is, Dad. And I thought it best not to burden him with responsibilities beyond his experience. The lie rolled off his tongue so naturally. I almost admired the audacity. Small consulting firms, if they only knew that my small firm had just closed an 8-figure deal with Microsoft. Besides, Daniel continued, I need someone completely dedicated to growing the company. James has always been a little distracted. Very much his own man, you know. Sarah turned to me, eyes flashing with indignation. You're going to let him talk about you like that? For now, I murmured, watching Daniel hand out makeshift business cards with CEO in transition printed on them. That's when Emily approached, visibly uncomfortable. At 28, my sister had always been the most sensitive member of our family, often serving as the silent mediator in the toxic Thompson dynamic. James, can I talk to you for a moment? She asked, pulling me aside. This isn't right, she said in nervous bursts. Announcing this at your wedding, excluding you completely, I confronted Dad an hour ago. Do you know what he said? I waited, though I already knew that you wouldn't have the head to manage that kind of responsibility. That Daniel was born to lead as if you were some kind of incompetent. She shook her head. James, I know you're building something big in California. I may not understand all the technical details, but I see how you talk about your work. There's passion, real knowledge. We grew up in the same house. I saw you build computers at 12, hack the school network at 15, win programming awards. Daniel can barely use Excel without help. And the worst part is Dad knows it. He knows you're more capable, smarter, more innovative, but something in him can't accept that. Why do you think that is? I asked. Emily hesitated. Because you remind him of what he isn't. Dad got lucky with the company. Right time, right place. But you have genuine talent. It scares him. Before I could respond, Daniel's voice boomed from across the room. Frankly, I think James feels relieved. Family pressure, expectations, responsibilities. Not everyone is cut out for this kind of life. Sarah stood at the edge of his audience, fists clenched, and I could tell exactly when her patience broke. Daniel, she cut in sharply. Would you mind not talking about my husband as if he weren't here? The room went quiet. Daniel blinked, unprepared for resistance. Sarah, I wasn't. Yes, you were. You've spent the last 20 minutes belittling his accomplishments to people who barely know him. Pride and panic battled in me. She was defending my honor, but she was also escalating something I preferred to control. Look, Sarah, Daniel said, adopting his defensive posture. I know you want to support your husband, but there are family dynamics you don't understand. I understand perfectly, she shot back. I understand that you've spent the entire evening promoting yourself at his expense at his wedding. Now the room was silent, even side conversations gone. Walter, appearing like a hawk to manage optics, stepped in with his political smile. Everyone, let's keep the focus on the celebration. Daniel, how about a toast to the bride and groom? But the damage was done. The mask had slipped and several guests had now seen the real family dynamic. As Daniel raised his glass in a forced toast, I made my final decision. After 31 years, I was done being the invisible son, the underrated brother, the family member whose accomplishments were systematically minimized or ignored. But as I watched Daniel toast my brother James and his beautiful wife, using my own wedding as a platform for his personal celebration, I felt something harden inside me. It would no longer be about proving my worth to them. It would be about showing them exactly how blind they had chosen to be. Tomorrow morning, J.T. Parker Investments would meet with Thomson Technologies leadership to discuss the transition. Daniel would walk into that room expecting to meet a mysterious investor willing to finance his business dreams. Instead, he would discover that some revenge is worth waiting a decade to execute perfectly, and that underestimating the wrong son of the family can cost a lot more than $60 million. The morning after the wedding brought an emotional hangover that had nothing to do with champagne. Sarah woke up before me, sitting on the edge of the bed with a cup of coffee, staring out the window of our hotel room. "Are you really going to let this go?" she asked without turning around. "Let it go? What?" "The humiliation, the exclusion, the way they talked about you in front of all our family and friends." I sat down next to her, pulling her closer. "Sarah, there are things about me, about my company that you don't know yet." She turned to face me, studying my face. "Then tell me." For 3 hours I explained everything. How I had built Vertex Digital Solutions. How J.T. Parker was my pseudonym. How I had spent the last 18 months studying every aspect of Thomson Technologies, identifying weaknesses, mapping dependencies. "You're telling me," Sarah said slowly, "that you're the mystery buyer, that you bought your father's company?" Technically, J.T. Parker Investments made an offer to acquire the company that was accepted by the board. I just coordinated the details. Sarah was silent for a long moment. Then she started to laugh. Not a nervous laugh, but a genuine one that grew into a belly laugh that doubled her over. "Daniel is going to find out that you're the new boss." She managed to say between laughs, "My God, James, that's brilliant and terrible at the same time." As Sarah processed the revelation, my phone rang. It was Kevin Lee, my lawyer and CFO of Vertex Digital Solutions. "James, we have a small problem with Thomson's paperwork. They're asking for additional information about J.T. Parker's ownership structure before they'll finalize it." "What kind of information?" "Nothing that compromises your identity yet, but Walter Thomson is being more diligent than we expected. He's hired an independent auditing firm to verify our assets." That was unexpected. Dad had never shown this level of caution in business before. "Kevin, speed up the paperwork. I want everything signed before they have time to ask too many questions." After I hung up, Sarah looked at me with concern. "Problems?" "Dad's being more careful than usual. Maybe Daniel suggested a more rigorous audit." "What does that mean?" "It means I need to speed up the schedule." We spent the rest of the morning canceling the honeymoon that had lasted only one night. Sarah insisted on accompanying me to watch the show, as she began to call it. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we were at Walter's law office where the final signing of the contracts would take place. I had arrived an hour before the meeting using a side entrance and was waiting in the adjacent conference room. Through the frosted glass wall, I could see Walter and Daniel arrive on time. Daniel was wearing his best suit and carrying a leather briefcase that I recognized as a Christmas gift Dad had given him years ago. "Nervous?" I heard Daniel ask as they organized documents. "A little," Walter admitted. "Something about this J.T. Parker bothers me. Too much secrecy, too much haste. Successful businessmen usually like to show their faces. Maybe he's just introverted." Daniel suggested. "A lot of tech geniuses are like that." Tech genius. If Daniel knew, he had called his own brother a genius. Walter's lawyer, Robert Mitchell, entered the room carrying several folders. "Gentlemen, I have good news and bad news about the audit of J.T. Parker's assets." My stomach tightened. The bad news is that they maintain an almost impenetrable level of privacy. The good news is that this is typical of high-performance investors. All verifiable assets are solid. The money is real. Walter visibly relaxed. "What about Parker himself? Any personal information?" "Very little. We know he's relatively young to have built this kind of wealth. Probably early 30s. Tech education. History of successful startups." Daniel laughed. "Sounds familiar. Reminds me of you at the same age." Dad. Maybe. Walter muttered. But I could tell something was still bothering him. At 3 o'clock sharp, Kevin entered the room where I was waiting. Ready? I took a deep breath, adjusted my tie, and followed Kevin into the main conference room. Walter and Daniel had their backs to us as we entered, examining documents spread out on the table. Their lawyer made the formal introductions. Walter, Daniel, I'd like to introduce J.T. Parker of J.T. Parker Investments. They turned simultaneously. Walter's face went through 3 distinct expressions in less than 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, and finally, absolute shock. Daniel needed a few seconds longer. When he finally understood, his leather briefcase slipped from his hands, documents scattering across the marble floor. James, Walter whispered as if he were seeing a ghost. Hello, Dad. Daniel. I extended my hand formally. Pleased to meet you officially as J.T. Parker. The silence that followed was so heavy I could hear the central air conditioning and distant traffic 16 floors below. Daniel found his voice first. Is this a joke? The $60 million in your bank account suggests not. I replied calmly. Walter sank into his chair, removing his glasses to clean lenses that weren't dirty. How? How did I build a $120 million company? Hard work, strategic vision, and maybe a little bit of that natural business instinct you always said I didn't have. The penny began to drop for Daniel. You tricked us. You lied to the whole family. Daniel, I've never lied about anything. You just never asked about my work with genuine interest. Walter finally looked up. J.T. Parker, James Thompson Parker. Parker is my mother's maiden name. I thought it was appropriate to honor the side of the family that always supported me. Robert Mitchell, clearly uncomfortable with the unexpected family dynamic, cleared his throat. Gentlemen, perhaps we should proceed with the signing. The documents are all in order. One moment, Walter raised his hand. James, why did you do this? Why didn't you come to us directly? The question I had waited years to hear. I did, Dad. When I was 22, I presented a detailed plan to modernize the company. You told me I didn't understand business. When I suggested partnerships with technology companies, you said they were passing fads. Every idea I presented was dismissed before it was even considered. Daniel tried to intervene, but that doesn't justify. Daniel, I interrupted, my voice growing firmer. In the last 9 years, how many times have you asked me about my work? How many times have you shown genuine interest in what I'm building? He opened his mouth, then closed it. And you, Dad, at any point during our quarterly calls, did you ever ask about my company, about my clients, about my employees? Walter looked down. The truth is, you created this J.T. Parker. It exists because James Thompson was never respected enough to have his ideas heard in this family. If you think this family revenge is getting intense, subscribe to the channel because what comes next will show you that some lessons are learned the hard way. Kevin placed the final contracts on the table. Gentlemen, I need everyone to sign today. The window of opportunity for this tax structure closes tomorrow. Walter looked at the papers then at me. And if I refuse to sign, then you lose the $60 million. The company goes bankrupt within 6 months due to lack of operating capital, and I buy the assets in liquidation for about $10 million. Daniel turned pale. You planned this all along. I plan to give our family a chance to prosper under new management. What happens from here on out is up to you. Walter picked up the pen, hesitated for a moment that seemed like an eternity, and signed his name. Daniel looked at his father, then at me, and finally at the contracts that would officially make his despised brother his new boss. Daniel stared at the contracts as if they were a death sentence. I won't sign this. You can't force me to work for you. You're right, I replied calmly. I can't force you, but the contracts are already valid with Dad's signature as chairman of the board. Your signature is just to confirm your position as transitional CEO. Transitional CEO? Daniel asked, confusion replacing anger in his voice. Kevin opened another folder. The responsibilities of the position are detailed here. Basically, you'll oversee the integration of legacy systems while our technical team implements the necessary updates. Walter finally found his voice. James, is this about money? I can increase your share of the inheritance. Dad, this has never been about money. My voice came out firmer than I intended. It's about respect, about recognition, about 30 years of being treated like my ideas are worthless. Daniel tried one last card. What if I expose all of this? Tell the whole family how you cheated us. I smiled genuinely for the first time in the meeting. Daniel, you're free to tell the story however you want. Just make sure you mention that your $120 million company was built by the brother you considered a failure. The color drained from Daniel's face. For the first time, he was fully comprehending the magnitude of the situation. Walter leaned forward. $120 million. James, that's impossible. You barely had enough money to come home for Christmas. I had enough money, Dad. I just chose not to spend it on tickets for a family that never showed any genuine interest in seeing me. Robert Mitchell cleared his throat again. Gentlemen, we still need to finalize some contractual details. Actually, I interrupted. There's something you don't know yet. I signaled to Kevin, who placed a third set of documents on the table. What's that? Walter asked suspiciously. Thompson Technologies wasn't my first acquisition from this family. Daniel frowned. What are you talking about? 6 months ago, I bought the mortgage on the house you live in. The same house where we grew up, where Dad built his first office, where the Thompson family put down its roots. The silence that followed was absolute. Walter opened and closed his mouth several times before he could speak. The mortgage, but we paid off the house 15 years ago. You paid off the original mortgage, but when you needed capital to expand the company 4 years ago, you used the house as collateral for a $2 million loan. Daniel turned pale. The loan with First National, which was sold to a consortium of investors after you missed 3 consecutive payments last year, a consortium that I control through J.T. Parker Investments. Walter sank further into his chair. We didn't miss any payments. Kevin opened a different folder. The records clearly show 3 missed payments between March and May of last year, totaling 93 days past due. That's impossible, Daniel protested. I make the payments myself every month. Daniel, I said softly. Do you remember transferring money from the company account to cover your sports betting debts? His expression changed from confusion to horror. How did you $12,800 in March, $35,000 in April, $42,000 in May, always in the week before the mortgage was due? Walter turned to Daniel with an expression I had never seen before. You stole from the company. I didn't steal, Daniel stammered. I was going to pay it all back. They were just temporary loans. Temporary loans that caused delays in mortgage payments, allowing the bank to sell the debt to outside investors. I finished. Reality was finally setting in for both of them. Not only had I bought the family business, but I had also bought the house they lived in. So, you're our boss and our landlord, Walter said, his voice barely above a whisper. Technically, yes. Daniel exploded. This is pure revenge. You plan to destroy our family. Daniel, if I wanted to destroy you, I would have foreclosed months ago and forced the sale of the house. I would have publicly exposed your embezzlement. I would have bought the company for much less at a bankruptcy auction. I paused to let that sink in. Instead, I paid $60 million for a company worth $40 at most. I offered you both respectable positions in the new structure and the house. You can continue to live there for as long as you want. Walter slowly raised his eyes. Why? Because despite everything, you are my family. And because I believe people can change when they finally understand the consequences of their actions. Sarah, who had remained silent in the adjacent room via an audio monitor, chose that moment to enter. Sorry to intrude, but I thought you might like to know that the news is already in the business papers. She placed a tablet on the table displaying the Boston Business Journal. The headline read, Tech Genius Reveals Himself as Despised Thompson Heir by His Family Company in Epic Turnaround. Daniel read the headline aloud, his voice breaking slightly on the word despised. The story is already being shared nationally, Sarah continued. Apparently, someone leaked details about how you were consistently overlooked by the family despite your superior qualifications. Walter closed his eyes. Our reputation will be rebuilt. I interrupted firmly, but this time based on actual merit, not nepotism and favoritism. Kevin glanced at his watch. Gentlemen, we need to finalize these documents. There's a press conference scheduled for 5 o'clock. Daniel finally picked up the pen, his hand trembling slightly, and asked, if I sign this, what exactly do you expect from me? I told him plainly, honesty, hard work, and a willingness to learn from people who truly understand the business. He signed his name with deliberate, careful movements. Walter looked at me across the table, his voice uncertain. James I don't know what to say. I answered, don't say anything yet, Dad. Let your actions over the next few months speak for you. When all the documents were signed and notarized, I stood to leave. But at the door, I turned back one last time. Oh, and one more thing you should know. Before the press conference, they both looked at me with renewed apprehension. Sarah is pregnant. You're going to be a grandfather and an uncle. The look of pure shock on their faces would have been comical under different circumstances. I added, I hope that when my son is born, he grows up in a family that values real talent over inherited privilege. Then I left them to process the fact that they had not only lost control of everything they had built, but also gained the chance to rebuild relationships that had seemed irreparably broken. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies, but forcing them to become better people. The real test of character, however, would come at the press conference when the whole world would watch to see how the Thompson family handled their new reality. The 5 p.m. press conference was a spectacle no business journalist could have predicted. Walter and Daniel sat beside me on the stage at the Four Seasons Hotel, their expressions shifting between embarrassment and forced resignation. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, looking directly into the cameras. "Today marks not only a change in ownership, but a complete evolution of Thompson Technologies' business philosophy." For 20 minutes, I explained how I had built Vertex Digital Solutions and why I chose to acquire the family business. I didn't bring up Daniel's debts or the intimate details of our family dysfunction, but I made it clear that merit and vision, not family connections, would guide our future. Then a Forbes reporter asked the question everyone had been waiting for. "Mr. Parker, how did your family react when they discovered your true identity?" Walter leaned toward the microphone before I could answer. "My son has completely surprised me," he said. "And I can say with pride that underestimating James Thompson was the biggest business mistake of my career." His public admission caught Daniel and me completely off guard. I looked at my father and saw something I had never seen before. Genuine respect mixed with deep regret. Daniel also spoke, his voice hesitant but sincere. "I learned today that competence is not hereditary. My brother built something extraordinary while I squandered opportunities one didn't deserve." 6 months after the press conference, the Thompson family's transformation had become a case study in business schools. Not just because of the unusual internal acquisition, but because of how we all evolved. After that confrontation, Daniel fulfilled his promise to change in surprising ways. He joined Alcoholics Anonymous, not just for his gambling, but for the drinking problem he had never admitted publicly, and began working as an assistant in our customer service division, refusing any preferential treatment. "I want to learn the business from the bottom up," he told me during our first monthly review meeting, "just like you did." Walter embraced his new role as chairman emeritus with a humility that surprised me every day. He began mentoring young entrepreneurs, sharing not only his successes, but more importantly his mistakes about talent and meritocracy. In an article for the Harvard Business Review, he wrote, "I spent decades looking for a successor who looked like me. Meanwhile, the real leader was right in front of me, just waiting for a chance to prove his worth." Sarah gave birth to our daughter, Olivia, in March. And when Walter held her for the first time, he whispered in her ear, "Your grandpa is going to make sure you grow up in a family that recognizes greatness, no matter where it comes from." Under new management, Thompson Technologies, now a division of Vertex Holdings, grew 40% in its first year. We implemented the technological innovations I had proposed a decade earlier, along with new advances we had developed in California. Emily became our communications director and discovered a natural gift for translating technical innovation into accessible language. "I always knew you'd be amazing," she told me over our first anniversary lunch. "I just didn't know you'd be so devastatingly strategic." But the most significant moment didn't happen during a media interview or corporate event. It happened one quiet afternoon in my office when Daniel knocked on the door holding a familiar folder. "Remember this presentation?" he asked, setting my original proposal from 10 years ago on my desk. I found it in the file room and read it all the way through for the first time. He flipped through the pages slowly. "James, this is exactly what we implemented this year. Every detail, every market prediction, every strategy. You were right about everything." He paused, gazing out at the Boston skyline. "I wonder where we'd be if Dad had listened to you back then." I told him, "It doesn't matter where we'd be. What matters is where we are now and where we're going." The real transformation wasn't my rise from rejected son to successful CEO. It was watching an entire family learn that greatness doesn't come from titles or inheritance, but from character, competence, and the courage to acknowledge mistakes. Walter didn't just apologize. He redefined his views on leadership and legacy. Daniel didn't just accept his flaws. He worked to overcome them through humility and education. During the second Thanksgiving after the acquisition, when everyone shared gratitude instead of competing for status, I realized I had gained something far more valuable than revenge. I had achieved reconciliation. 3 years later, I stand in our 20th floor office overlooking Boston Harbor. Olivia plays with building blocks on the floor, sometimes running to the window to wave at Grandpa Walter, who visits for lunch every Friday. Daniel now runs our client development division, a role he earned through genuine effort and growth, and his ideas, when rooted in real experience rather than entitlement, are often brilliant. The most important lesson I learned wasn't about building empires or executing vendettas. It was about the power of giving people the chance to become better versions of themselves, even when they don't initially deserve it. Walter often says his greatest pride isn't building a $40 million company. It's raising a son who turned it into a $200 million company while preserving family values. You taught me that true leadership isn't about controlling people, he told me last week. It's about inspiring them to exceed what they thought possible. If this story of family, business, and second chances has touched your heart, subscribe for more stories about how perseverance and intelligence can turn rejection into triumph. Because everyone has untapped potential, waiting for the right opportunity. Just yesterday, Olivia built a block tower taller than she is. And when I asked her how she did it, she said, "Daddy, I just kept adding blocks until I got where I wanted to go." Sometimes the deepest wisdom comes from the simplest places. And sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming the person you always knew you could be and giving others the chance to do the same. In the end, I didn't destroy my family. I rebuilt it one block at a time.